Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Florence Weinberger and Kathleen Tyler. Florence Weinberger wrote, quote, I am the author of 6 collections of poetry, the most recent, These Days of Simple Mooring, New and Selected Poems, winner of the Blue Light Press Book Award, along with 6 nominations for a Pushcart Prize and a nomination for Best of the Net. My poetry has appeared in literary magazines including Spillway, Nimrod, Rattle, Baltimore Review, Cultural Weekly, December, North American Review, and Shenandoah. Poems have also been published in many anthologies, unnamed because I want to add my appreciation for a long ago workshop with Holly, that's Prado, on Mariposa. And I also want to mention a poem I wrote after attending one of her readings, which appears in my book, Sacred Graffiti, end of quote. Here's a superb poet, Florence Weinberger.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. Thank you for inviting me. I would like to start with a poem dedicated to Holly. I was trying to remember where and when we first met. I think it was, did she teach at the Women's Building downtown LA?
Yes.
That
Yes.
was back in the 70s. Yeah, that's when I first met her. The poem, though, was written much later after I attended a reading, and I tracked that date down. It was like 2002. Time flies. So here's the poem. Holly Prado reads her poetry. Let me get my glasses. The first poem extols an oak table she lovingly polishes, and as she rubs, she hopes the friend who lent it to her forgets to want it back. And as she reads, you can almost see mist rise, the sweat of her reverence burnishing every syllable. We speak at the break, the decade since we first met. I tell her I have given so much away, replaced my oak school desk with a sleek sweep of glass and varnished veneer of no known pedigree. Her joy is in her aging skin, she says, and I see it as notched like the bark of trees young couples carve, their initials encased in hearts pierced through by feathered arrows, love, and her skin exposed as one. Holly's back for the reading second half. Her face lit by a past she gives away in tender sentences, too crafted to use the word life. What our hands keep polishing for the day when it will have to be returned. Mm. 2 years ago, I started writing birthday poems. I guess poems to myself in a way, but I hope to share little pieces of my life. So this one is called Reflections of an Optimistic Skeptic. I couldn't write a birthday poem for my 89th. I was not in the mood. COVID was spreading. We had no idea. My 90th, so still, I almost missed it. But friends sent lilies, walnuts, Ravensteins. 3 days later, I'm back at work, seeking unrhymed acuity. How to steer clear of trivia while boilerplate briefings bedevil my ebbing days. Could I say love with a straight face, without swagger, straight and tender? I gallop past 90, 9 tens of bumps and shallows under my belt, whole decades mostly forgotten, and the highlights mostly misremembered. My daughters want me to write a memoir. Read my poems, I tell them. Condensed, embellished, charged to explain our misfires, the hits, and the aspirational. Some might call them fictions with their gaps and garnishes. What was omitted? what was invented, all exists. The risible, the mawkish, rinsed in invisible ink, the fuck-ups filed next to finances, fevers, and family dinners, none of these were trivia. And my newest one, my 91st birthday, a quotidian mystery, a cellular lineup tangled like cat-played yarn. Some die from butter on baked potatoes. My mother's sins, mostly blameless, bit into her heart. My father's guilty as a politician's. Mine clenching for reasons it doesn't reveal, keeps beating while crumbling, while the planet, singed by the sun, peels. My 91st birthday wasn't a celebration, and it wasn't a dirge. No one invited, so nobody came. But some were thinking of me, I thought. A January cloudburst, like a letter telling me there's a leak in my roof. Though it rained all day, I contained a strange happiness. I never denied death's imminence. The pills I count coldly, while I take in the sunsets Capricorns get in the winter. My sense of wonder isn't always about beauty. It can be about men who make war. And at the end of the day, when I watch the news, the woman in Kiev begging an answer from a journalist. For what? For what? Yeah, okay. So the next poem is, I can't say exactly dedicated to your inhabitants of the valley, but I lived in the valley for 40 years. So let me start with this. I don't know where I put it. Hold on. Okay, I will find it a little later. I'm going to start with something else. This one, it seemed appropriate because of the day. It's very gray today. And at one time, I was very much interested in photography. So this is really about the photographers who really were artists, not the guys who are now photographing their dinner with their iPhones. This is called A Common Grayness, Silvers Everything. And this, by the way, is from my new book. You mentioned, Harry, These Days of Simple Mooring. On days like this, the Pacific, passive as a pond, a goose down cloud cover over the dun hills, we may not miss the sun at all. Its rictal grin and the way it gilds slicks of spit and grease on the tarmac. Diane Arbus and Ansel Adams, knowing sun could burn a shot or singe a cornea, worked with black and shades of gray, savoring grades of distinction. Once the sun's graze was out of their eyes, they could illuminate lodgepole pines, leach out any hint of pigment, even when summers blazed into conflagrations or bleakness eclipsed objectivity. What you saw is Earth's flea market, medleys of treasures lit up by light left over when the sun subsides. Click after click, shadow reinvented as matte bark, rock silhouette, silvered earthworm. Don't you remember the grapes of wrath? Mud on their tires when they finally reached the promised land. Windows smudged with a continent of grime. Dirty faces, white teeth, some semblance of a hopeful grin. Gray was the way Dorothy Lang uncovered the muck of Southern poverty. Helen Levitt, the faces of children who didn't laugh. How Roman Vishniak spackled grays were token smoke drifts over the crematoria. Though I heard the hopeless kept the memory of the glow, slow heat that wouldn't burn, but warmed, a sun that sanctified the ruins, filled the crevices on dark nights, and loved back the morning light. I haven't found that poem yet, but I will. I'm all over the place in my book, so I'm going to be all over the place here as well, whatever comes up. I thought a lot of people would sympathize with me. I have high blood pressure. So this is called The Prescription. He says when your blood turns sluggish and sleepy, eat something salty. Salt. All these years, no salt. I'd forgotten salt. No Chinese food. Canned chicken broth? Are you kidding me? I find one hidden in the far corner where canned goods expire. Crack it open, heat it, eat it, slurp it like a kid. It bites me like a loving old dog. It licks me back home to my mother's kitchen. I don't compare the slick of fat. I don't care. I'm told to eat salt. The taste, total recall. All the long history of salt preservation, salt roots and salt mines, salt wars and saltwater oceans, salt love coursing through my blood and pumping and pumping. And since it's still gray and rainy out, I'm going to read Winter Comfort. Winter comfort sweetened with parsnips, ruffs of knobbed celery, creviced by salt-parched failings of unlived minutes, measured like confessions whispered to a fissured wall. Potato thickness of phone gossip, a squeeze of lemon for a gutless tweet, carrots instead of sticks, a Spanish onion for thin-skinned days, rigor Neruda understood, paprika for passion, beans for mirth, a bloody bone for marrow. Simmer like a thick novel, its complications boil down to a reckoning, a coal to balance with lovage or parsley or other corrections, the long cooling, best reheated in a chilly season. Let me find that poem about. I don't know what it seems to have vanished. I should come across it. Okay. Okay. The medium is the messenger. I stole part of that from Marshall McLuhan, part of the title. My friend, who is a psychiatrist, scoffs when I tell him I saw two clouds, one dark, bristling with intimidation, and next to it, a fluffy white one. And as I'm watching, the white cloud closes over the dark one and gobbles it up. Shouldn't it be 7 white and 7 dark? He teases, re-referencing Pharaoh's dream, the one that made Joseph Prince of Egypt. I get a scoff when I expect an inquisitive eyebrow lift. He knows I'm not a prophet, but hey, humor me for a minute. Freudian that he is, fat cigars and pearly clouds may just be facts, and nature just nature banging up against nature, pure coincidence. While I see gods flagging me, look up. I'm sending you bouquets of white chrysanthemums.
Nice.
Maybe this is about smoke. Maybe it's about a pipe I once bought you, a briar encased in silver filigree, handmade and individual. Vacation photographs, pipes in your right hand, an elbow on a knee. The dark cocoa smell of the special blend of tobacco. Saturday afternoon, going out to buy tobacco from Pushy Melinda, who also sells chocolates and gives you free samples. Maybe it's about young waitresses and salesgirls, small noses twitching around you. Maybe it's about your hands, filling a pipe, dipping it into a leather pouch, tamping, lighting, drawing smoke, flavor, the jolt, the fire, my mother breathing through a respirator, the doctor asking whether she ever smoked, my father's emphysema, my inability to tolerate smoke, my anger, your accommodation, smoking after hours in the chilly garage before coming to bed. Maybe it's about polarity. Maybe it's about our relationship, how it clouds over, how it becomes impacted, turns to ashes and reignites. Maybe it's about friction and residue and mastery, what we breathe in each other's presence, what dissolves, what stays on the tongue, on the teeth. Maybe it's about my fear of losing you.
Mm.
Well, what do you know? I found that poem.
Yay.
It's called Agapanthus bougainvillea jacaranda. I wasn't born in the San Fernando Valley. My beloved high school in the South Bronx is closing forever, forever. I could dance to that stunted riff. I could cry. Where are the girls who sang Gilbert and Sullivan? Where are the tenors? I met one once. He served me pizza in Queens. I hoped he was on his way. I was on the way to transit, crossed the country in a 53 Olds, surprised how bleak Texas was, how red was Missouri, or was it Kansas? Missouri was so quiet we had to leave a restaurant when my baby screamed bloody murder. We got to LA in May, the month Agapanthus bloomed. I didn't notice I was still crying. I miss my mother. I miss the subway and the New York Public Library, where I once was seduced by a Sharpie who said he liked the hair on my arms.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't name the trees. We bought a house with an orange tree. We thrilled ourselves. We went back to New York on a brisk day in March. We couldn't go back. We were welcomed but everyone had closed themselves over the gap we left. We were bulky, we were cold and inconvenient. We slept in guest rooms. We were no longer cosmopolitan. On plants no one had heard of. They couldn't even picture Agapanthus. The plethora of purple debris left on the ground by lavish jacarandas. The cerise profusion of bougainvillea. To them, profusion is clotted living, thick-packed citizens on Fifth Avenue in the afternoon. I'm not being pejorative. I enjoy pushing to get somewhere. I like the sensible grid of Manhattan. I'll always find the Museum of Modern Art. It is pitched where it was, winning its war with Jackson Pollock's randomness as proof of eclectic coexistence. Oh, I think they moved the Russo, you know which one. It was still March when I got back to LA. The whole valley suffused with the scent of citrus, my mind reeling, my feet dancing as if I had chosen the right partner. Ivy at last supporting a north wall, once held up only by graffiti. How grave and inquiring are the purple umbels of Agapanthus. Someone brought them here from Africa. Someone snipped a sprig of bougainvillea from some wet loam in South America, smuggled it in a raincoat pocket. Anyone who's ever tripped over a broken eucalyptus branch knows that God walked across oceans to get here. Spanish names on the boulevard. If I remember the waltz and the two-step, I can be at home anywhere. I saw similar shrubs in Italy. I drank that same red wine in Hungary. And my final poem, Nameless Flowers, Anonymous Trees. This poem, the original version of this poem, I wrote in high school. And since I was the editor of the newspaper, I was able to put it into the newspaper. Nobody argued with me. But I have since worked on it and worked on it and worked on it. And here's the latest version. When I moved here, I saw the tarnished silvers, greens torn down to brown by wind and wear. But I couldn't name them until I had peered into the faces of my neighbors. And then mystery broke into agapanthus, impatience, manzanita, invasive yellow mustard, and sage and chaparral and golden yarrow. And in the gullies, pale, wistful clusters of narrow-leaved milkweed, food and harbor for the monarch butterfly, its fuzzy foliage, nation's whisperer, which at the height of their bliss tells them it's time to mount the wind and move on. Where I grew up, trees were anonymous. They seemed accidental, a random seed, a crack in the sidewalk, right? But we kids knew Wedgwood blue lilacs outside the flower shops, fragrant, intoxicant on Mother's Day. My fourth grade teacher favored ferns cascading over the windowsills like chips of clay glazed with celadon. One early spring morning, right outside my classroom window, an unnamed tree flaunted a liquid green so thin, the sun, piercing an infant leaf, passed right through it, landing on my right hand. I sat there until it told me it's time to go.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Florence, for such a wonderful, comforting reading. Your writing is so precise and there's warmth in it, and you have such a strength of narrative, and you're very moving. Your poems touch me very deeply, and you're also very witty, and you have such a lively imagination, and you have such a great memory. When did you write your first poem?
I knew you were going to ask me that. And I actually don't know. I think I might have been in fifth grade. But I know in fourth grade, I wrote a Halloween play for my class. But I just loved writing. When I was in first grade, I just loved the feel of the pen in my hand. So, I was sort of doomed and blessed to write. I don't really remember when I wrote my first poem, but I think I wrote a poem before I even read poems. It was just so innate. And I wrote novels, I wrote short stories for a long time, and finally realized it was poetry.
What is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
The concision, for one thing. When I worked on novels, I had to work for years and stay within that form. And with poetry, I can move around much more freely. Maybe I'm too impatient now to work on longer forms. And it's just, my busy mind is always picking up things that interest me. So that's, the poetry is perfect for that. But I still go back a lot. I do a lot of revision because I realize my initial impressions are very superficial, and I want to go deeper. And that's what I've been doing. I'm doing a lot of that now, going back to older work, and this poem is an example of that.
You have such clarity in your writing. You have such a great memory. You mentioned in one of your latter poems about being an editor. What was that? An editor of a newspaper, a magazine?
I was high school. That was my high school newspaper. Yeah. And I was the first female to be there. Yeah, I mean, that was the kind of thing that was going on in those days. And I had a lot of pressure from the administration in those days. I could not be as free as I wanted to be. I got a lot of experience, and I thought I was going to be a journalist. That didn't happen. I was just telling someone one of the guys from our high school was working on one of the New York newspapers. So I thought, well, now I'm going to be able to get a job. I've got an in. And so I went up there for a job, and he said, "Oh, we've got Yale graduates working as copy boys." He says, "Go out of town." I wasn't about to go there. So
now, what is a day, as we get older? I'm 82, and I don't have the strength I used to have as a writer as I had when I was a younger man. How do you, what's your energy like as you've grown older in terms of writing?
Well, I have often said poetry is going to kill me. I write at least 5 mornings a week for a couple of hours, and I'm just gone after that. So, I mean, if you saw the mess on my desk, so, a lot of other things go by the wayside.
And who are a couple of your influences in poetry?
It's hard to say. There are poets I like, but I don't know to what extent they've influenced me. Not currently, but recently, Gerald Stern was one of my favorite poets. Lisa Mueller, who is a very underrated poet.
Mhm.
I worked with her many years ago. She was a wonderful poet. Galway Connell, Sharon Olds, the older people, I can hardly say that the current, I don't even know the current poets. So it's, it's that middle, Robert Pinsky, those people.
Well, thank you very much, Florence. I love the poetry, and we're very deeply grateful to you for appearing on the Harry's Poetry Hour at MPTF. So thank you very much.
And thank you.
Kathleen Tyler was born in Florida, lived many years in Los Angeles, and now calls North Carolina home. A collection of her short stories, What Shadows Eat, was selected by Yellow Flag Press for their 2020 Cypress and Pine series. She is also the author of 3 collections of poetry, Open the Window and Drowned, My Florida, and The Secret Box. Her short stories and poetry have appeared in numerous journals, and she's been the featured reader at venues in California, Florida, and North Carolina. Here's a splendid poet, Kathleen Tyler.
Thank you, Harry, and thank you for having me. And thank you, Jennifer, and the team at Creative Chaos, and thank you, Florence. I really enjoyed that. I especially like the poem about moving from from New York to LA, having here from my introduction, made several pilgrimages. And I also want to thank the audience. I mean, you couldn't have a poetry reading, right, without the audience. Though I have read in an empty room before, no audience. And I just think, wow, I'm here, I'm going to read. At least the host did not have to introduce me to myself. So I just want to thank everyone. And I'm going to open with a poem that kind of is sort of an explanation of what poetry is to me. It's called Every Poem Stripped to Its Most Savage Self is the leeward slant of a stormed orchard, blossoms crossed with profoundest sorrow, a plum ravaged, wind shook to the ground. An unanswered question, if I hold my heart to light, will its chambers ripen, bear fruit? Oh, gathering shattered, angels singing in the ruin. This poem, anyone in the audience has read my prose, you might recognize a few lines, but I mean, I'm allowed to steal from myself, right? But this is from my second book I'll talk a little bit about later. It's called Dream with Shell Decoration. It was the ice cream that reminded me days I thought so much of reversing. I grow smaller, teeth click against the wood rim as I dropped peaches in. What does the sky make of all this cranking backwards? She pushes my face into the lovely, sweet cream, hand in my hair. In the field, horses are sick. It's like they're looking right at me, but everything is beyond. They are cantering to the margin of a deeper country. Shimmering, they slip into earth, dragging an Eden behind. Steam from their nostrils cradled in grass. I am tired of pushing carcasses of shells into wet cement, of sleeping out back with the dog. I return to the wheel of childhood, seeking the mother who wears a bright shift, fingers blistered from picking stone fruit. Beneath my knit cap, I reel. Where is the girl who eats me by bits? There in the orchard, healing away. Like that poem, this poem is from my second book, which is my favorite book. I mean, not out of all the books in the world, but out of the few I've written, I like this one the best. Anyway, it's called My Florida, and it would probably be a lot darker than it is if DeSantis had been the governor when I wrote it, but we won't go there. Anyway, it is called Poem with Sharp Little Teeth. In the country of my childhood, it is always night. Tiny creatures bore into the soft spot behind my knee. In the morning, I know a body perforated with bite marks will rise. In the morning, I know I will leave this house swinging a bag of snakes tied with a satiny pink ribbon. Strangers will call for me, fangs curve through the burlap. Soon, it is a bag of motherly bones tied with someone's tongue that never stops wagging. The bag is neither too heavy nor light, but its movements are cumbersome. It spooks the ones who once welcomed me. Crowds part as before a prophet or plague. An odor of dismay wafts from it. It is starting to rhyme in the language of the little ones. Oh, whose porch can I leave it on? Okay, this poem, sometimes I like to think that I speak for the children who never made it out of the darkness of childhood, out of whatever it was, that their situation was. And I think, well, maybe no one wants to hear those poems. But I think, you got to trust your audience and let them take what they take and leave behind what they don't want. So this is called Poem with My Father's First Suicide. All morning, my sisters argue over whose fault everything is. Mine, each insists. The backs of their knees, their bunched shorts swing high above me. Heels drag down clouds, making the sky clearer, smaller. Of course, I want them dead. Blameless little bodies flung into the Spanish bayonet. For hours, I have been hacking through jasmine, tuberoses, wanting something that is red. There is my cinnamon-colored dog. She waits on the carport under an old linoleum table. Her eyes rotate towards the gun's click. The whites gleam. Her body a machine that chuffs the night darker. Often I breathe like that, gasping as my lungs swell, propelled by shame, heels pounding the floor in some rage. As now my father, pissed because he blew cash for the vet on booze, slips the hammer. When the first bullet crashes into her hip, she howls and snaps air, or maybe that is me trying to bite my way into another life. Is it too much to ask to put my hands in sweet fur and have them come out clean? I am blown to the end of this hope, sisters wailing, the second bullet shattering bone, then the third, fourth, and fifth. Vomit foams from her mouth, nose. Police come. Do you live in a house with violent flowers? A collie run in the backyard? You're at the right place, I want to say, but my throat closes. The cops cursing silently, looking away. My father handcuffed in the squad car, crying. Light pulses red against the garage the way light does when everything comes unhinged. The officer in charge finishes off my dog, but I live on, knowing there was the sixth bullet, and my father looked into the muzzle, hesitated, and I said, or thought I said, give me the gun. I can do it.
Wow.
So these next poems that I'm going to read are new. I mean, at least they're not new, but they haven't been published in a book. And usually I like to read stuff, it's been published and I'm comfortable with and whatnot. But I just decided I'm going to read them. I mean, you can be afraid or you can be a poet, I guess you can be both at the same time. But anyway, I'm going to do it. This one has two epigraphs in it. The first, there's two parts. And one, the epigraph is just a line from an article I read in the New York Times about sloths and the moths that live and survive in their fur. And I'm just always so intrigued with that and how so many things work together just to survive in this life. And the second part has an epigraph, and it's by Ovid. And it's really, the poem is really about making art, but kind of fits the other one too. Descent. 1. The slow climb down to the forest floor affords the pregnant moths that live in the sloth's fleece a chance to lay eggs. Dear sloth, Do you lumber towards destruction, moth-burdened, because you know making is monstrous and necessary? Coyotes, wild dogs, a panther's prow, closing the distance between you and the leaf midden you claw towards, belly dragging to deposit your pregnant pyralids, whose spawn feast on your shit, then flutter skyward to mate in your fleece. 2. He saw the feathers on the water and cursed his art. Not all things survive flight, no matter how beautiful. Consider Icarus, condemned to the land of the speechless, dead. And my sister, too. She ignored the warning of melted wax, feathers scattered, her experimental sport plane crushed on a runway gray as water. Once we were young, jumping from swings at the pause of their art, that briefest gasp when perhaps danger could have been thwarted. She tormented me into a corner, a black widow, she claimed, dangling from a stick. But I am the cruel child, spinning and spinning her story, however my hands choose to shape it. Web of a crafty spider, tawny moth, silk trapped, wings beating frantically. One advantage of Zoom, I guess, is that you can't have anyone interrupt you. And not that anyone in this audience ever would. I'm sure you know all about poetry manners, but I read once and some guy just kept stopping me and saying, "What's that word you said? Well, what does that mean?" I'm like, I finally just gave up. Goodbye. But anyway, this kind of, I guess, these are sister poems pretty much through to the last one. Night, a possible wholeness. You appear sheathed in the green of dusk, stippling cypress crowns. Oh, sister, quickening in the curtains murmurs, why did you come looking, not so resolutely? A conversation misconstrued from every cue, sounds of another moon breathing, my little book of malice unbuckled, whimpering for pardon. Okay. This poem, I'm from Florida, Tampa, and every year there was a big, what they call the Gasparilla Parade, and it celebrated this pirate called Jose Gaspar, who was just never existed, but anyway. And they have a replica ship that sails into the harbor, and they set off cannon, and it was really a big thing, and it was a lot of fun. And it was right by a Tampa University, which is an incredible, beautiful place if you've ever seen it. But anyway, it also has an epigraph. At Tampa University, after her funeral, did you leave something behind, someplace that cannot bear your absence? It's a real case. 2 girls ghosting beneath the Platte Street Bridge, ankles gashed by river rocks. They do not speak as the water spiders do not speak, but flit across the surface, bodies slashed by light. My sister cries for hibiscus to adorn her curls, beauty, a bulwark against terror, not of Gaspar's pirate ship invading, crescent moon visible still, death's replica sail, but of the scavenging, bits of bread, childhood, sucked marrow bone clean, sustenance for one. Pigeons squabble over bagel crumbs, ripples split the live oak shadow. Along this same riverbank I've returned to 50 years later. A car backfires and birds erupt, return to earth, a body whole. Mine is a diaspora mangled by flight, a different explosion. Cannon shot, signaling the ship, a parade, scrambling after streamers, pirates' coins, chocolate, gold. Every haunting we carry with us, a mast sliding through mist. The drawbridge opens and sun spears its grates as it must have pierced the crenets of DeSoto's stallions, debarking on the shore of Stone Age, Florida, not far from this harbor where the world's first seaplane landed and hers crashed, a primitive thing too, the hungriest red. Okay, this poem mentions calamitins. I can't remember if they have them in California, though they do grow citrus. That was the one thing that just dismayed me when I moved to North Carolina. I went to the garden store and said, "Where's the citrus?" And they're like, "Citrus? You can't grow citrus here because it freezes in the winter." But that's not true. You put it in pots and bring it on the porch. But anyway, calamitins are sour oranges. This is how much salt we devote to the dead. I trail behind your absence, circling a grove of wild calamitins. Show your photo to ghost orchids, ferns damp with childhood's deluge. Home, a beast saddened by its own storm. Even those who fled drowned, bodies stacked like driftwood blackening. Your bruised, masked flesh, tongue swollen as a pitcher plant. Prayer flood, I search for proof of you. Sunsets swept away, a shark's tooth shaped like a cross, shroud dragged, tipped to tip, Christ of the abyss. Is it enough to know you are lost, adrift among the detritus, hurricanes at dawn, something waiting to take your heart in its teeth? And okay, this is kind of more of the same. So winter country. Through the marshy underbrush, salt eaters come, dragging the world's sorrow in a boat. Double-toothed leaves of silver maples trill in the wind, and songbirds tear out their own hearts. Death, a night symphony, the only music you've ever loved, notes wrung from the oboe's throat that once seemed so far away. Pond lilies bunch and sway, shadow root that echoes the landscape you now inhabit, blossoming undeterred, a drop of blood on a linen white stamen, the least comfort denied. This poem I actually wrote, or at least dedicated, for my nephew, who of course doesn't even know I wrote it or never read it or anything. But his mother is the sister mentioned, my sister mentioned in these poems. Then there were trees for KRB. You see your mother flying a plane constructed from the pale clouds of childhood, immobile stars, planets, singular moon circles, your vision twisting like a Mobius strip. What was once a house cocoon around you, wary silk, unwinds its threads of light. A plume moth's dustings gild the distant rooms you inhabited. How far you've come from that pastel nursery, morning's first salt, deerlick at dawn, silvering your fingers as memory quickens the dreams of the dead. Your mother hovering in her gossamer casket of dew. And I'll end with this poem, which, it came to me while riding a horse up in the Sierras. Beyond the burn line. After the fire, we ride past grasses stiffened black, bone raw oak trunks. Our guide halts in a meadow carpeted with carrion, leather stretched limbs, splayed clavicles, rib cage clasping the ruined prayers of clouds. A girl slides from her pony, lifts the tiny perfect cranium of an unborn lamb, coyote killed here in the savaged field. Cool, oh, cool, how cool, the girl's mother croons. She pulls a dried leaf, braille pricked, from her daughter's hair. Cows graze undisturbed. An army transport plane rumbles by. Its trail, a gauze scarf trembling, sorrow gone to ground. I prefer earth to the heavens, a horse to a car. When I die, leave me in the bone field alongside the scattered hooves and skulls, palms open to sky.
Thank you, Kathleen.
Thank you.
You have you see so much, and you have such a fullness in your writing. It's erudite, it's concise, it's transfixing. You go into your childhood is very touching. And one thing I always love about your poetry, there's a certain courage. You're not afraid to go into the dark and face danger. And also the poem about your sister was so beautiful and touching. What do you, may I ask this question? I know you can't take what a person writes as truth in terms of reality, but and it may not be an appropriate question to ask, but was that true about your father?
The one about my father and the dog?
Yep.
Yes, it's true. And I have to say, you probably hear so much, Holly this, Holly that, but she gave me the courage. She says, go where the dark, where it is dark, go there. That's, your poem is speaking from there, from that place.
Well, you certainly do that. And I love that last part where you said you prefer the earth over heaven. But it's, just in terms of poetry, they're almost, I know you taught for many years and you're very erudite in poetry. It's evident in your writing. There's a Wordsworthian fullness in your poetry too. Somehow the inner and the outer, what you see in the world, you see so much. You've been on the show before, and I probably asked you those questions that I asked Florence. You're a short story writer also. How do you determine what you're going to write? Do you make a conscious decision, or do you just start writing and it tells you what it's writing?
It's always like I've always loved writing poetry. I think first before everything, and then I wrote short stories, and then I wrote poems, and but then actually I wrote a novel because I just had this drive, this idea, this story that told me, you must write this. And I did. I haven't gotten it published yet, but I'm working on it. and then I started writing short stories again. I mean, the short stories that are in that book I had published are very old, but I thought, what the heck? I'm going to pull them out and, dust them off and revise them and send them out and see what happens. And and it worked out. But nowadays I'm really writing a lot of prose, though I miss poetry and I've been writing down lines and I look forward to getting back to it.
Well, when you sit down to write a poem, what do you focus on? Does an idea come to you, or is it an image or words? How does that happen within you?
It depends. Sometimes it's a memory. Sometimes it's just an image. You see something and this whole world kind of constructs itself out of just something simple, like seeing some amaryllis blooming when you're walking down the street, and that takes you back to, I don't know, the Ringling Brothers Circus and so on. That's just how it works. We all know that, with our memory. Just one thing happens and then boom, 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 and you're off.
And who are some of the poets before you were, not your contemporaries, but when you look back in poetry, who are a couple of your influences?
Not my contemporaries, because I wanted to give a shout out to, I read a book like last year, I guess it was last year, it's called Post-Colonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. Oh, it's fantastic. I would just so recommend it. And I just read House of Poured Out Waters by Jane Mead. That's also fabulous. But so, in terms of influencing me, it's kind of like Florence said. I read poems I really like. I love the 17th century religious poets, Herrick and that whole crowd. And I'm not religious at all, but their yearning really is not. It's almost like the heavenly things. It's just a metaphor for desire and love and fear. And
I love the 17th century poets too. There's a spirituality and a sensuousness with them. And they're so focused. But Donne and Herbert and Herrick.
Yes, Donne, Herbert, right.
That's another thing that I left out when I was talking about your poetry, the musicality. You have such fine musicality in your poetry. Well, this is really, you two are the perfect poets for this day. You brought us warmth and comfort and intelligence and depth in your writing. And I'm deeply appreciative of both of you. It's always a pleasure to hear your writing, Kathleen. And I did do a reading with you, Florence, and that was where I saw how good you were. And I'm very happy that you wanted to read with us. So I want to thank you both, Kathleen Tyler and Florence Weinberger, for a marvelous reading. And I would just like to say one thing before we leave, that next Tuesday, we have two marvelous poets, Richard Modiana and S.A. Griffin, will each read from their new books.
Nice.
And thank you very much. And here's our wonderful director, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. That was amazing. I actually was writing to the crew while you were reading. I'm like, stop what you're doing and just pay attention to this. These are amazing poets. So thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.